Get up, move around, take care of things. Still talking. Yeah. Great.
And he also has every time I'm talking
Worse.
Okay, everybody. Do I do the preschool thing? I love that you're talking to each other. That's really the best outcome of the day, is that you get to know people and you get your mind thinking about all these things. So hate to interrupt, but why don't we get some feedback from a couple of groups, just in the interest of time. I'm not sure we're going to be able to go to every table. So who would like to volunteer, kicking off with telling us about number one, or really about what your response was to number one and number two? I think this table looks ready. All right.
Okay. I gotta write it down.
We decided to, the situation that we want to impact is the job, obviously the joblessness, by attracting industry partners that will help host paid internships for us to retrain workers, possibly in other areas, while providing them slightly livable wage to combat the fact that they don't have an income right now. So we figured out that training is nice, but training doesn't solve the immediate issue of I don't have an income. So we pursue employers and partnerships that will, leverage the grant money that we're applying for to train our employees, but at the same time, kind of reduce the impact of them having to pay these people because it's an internship or at higher rates.
Okay, and how did you get into this? How did you examine, or I'm sorry, did you have something to add to that? I'm sorry, you had your hand up. Yep.
Oh, no, I'm just saying the real life situation that we pulled it from is the closing down of Hyman Hospital.
Okay.
When people who have been working there, a lot of them have been working there a very long time, and their skill sets over that period of time had gained increased wages over time, raises, but being reintroduced into the workforce after closing in the hospital, nobody wants to pay them what they're worth. They don't view their experience with the same value, the same monetary value. So to bridge that gap, and to kill two birds with one stone, the idea was presented to get grant money to partner with other companies to help both the person learning the new skill set in the paid internship and to also take some of the financial weight of the company sponsoring it, to work together to make it so that they can get new skills but also not have a gap in income.
And then for these employers, that they could have new employees that they've. Okay, great. And what kind of research did you do for this, or what kind of background information would you collect to make your case?
We would look at, so just thinking about the vast number of employees that were displaced, we're looking at salaries, we're looking at the number of displaced workers, the length of time of employment with that employer, education levels for these people that were displaced, and also, if we could, try to get a sense of what was the livable wage they were working with.
So your program you're saying was directly in response to this particular event?
Yeah.
Okay. So that would be, what kind of funder do you think would be interested in that if you're looking at something very particular to your location?
I guess anyone for my social social worker hat on. Anyone that's interested in not having like unemployment rates go up, anyone that's interested in really impacting communities the communities that would have been, impacted by this type of mass job loss. Thinking about the long-term effects for each person that was unemployed or lost their job at that point, what would be the diminishing returns for everything else in their life at that point? And so going after people who have that kind of social responsibility to make sure that communities stay vital and not suffer from high amounts of people in the community not being employed.
So that sounds to me like a government responsibility to some extent, right? For dislocated workers. And so that could be a city or county's, response to this particular closing, of a major employer or something like that. Yeah. Okay, good. How about another group? We'll do this one, and we'll pick you guys this afternoon. How about that? Do that. Okay. Go ahead. Thank you, group one.
We changed the mission statement a little bit.
Okay. I like that. If you don't like it.
We tailored it to Brittany's interest. And so the problem statement we made was people need to develop or internalize a sense of self-worth. So we're going after the very foundational part of the community, the individual. And we identified the following as current situation that we need to impact. Number one, poor mental health resources, poverty, and basic foundational education opportunities. We felt those three things, and what else did I miss?
Lack of support.
Lack of support for individuals.
Belonging.
And a sense of community belonging. And then we talked about, for number two, how would you define the problem? What data assessments? There's a wealth of mental health information out there, both state, local, federal. Poverty statistics, we've got that in spades across the United States, all disparity. And then basic foundational education. So there's a lot of data available on that too.
So why now in this place for something this fundamental and important and broad?
Because it's an immediate need. Mental health is an immediate need. Education is an immediate need. Addressing poverty is an immediate need.
And the world is moving towards evidence-based practice around trauma and the negative impacts of trauma.
And that's the start with the kids. That's how we do it now. That's what we do with the kids.
Which group said you were okay, I love that you came up with your own. It's a good foil. So this is a lot of issues. These are big issues. Comments about this? Yeah.
I think one of the challenges we had, which it took us a long time to get to this point, is we kept thinking, we kept going further and further down the rabbit hole. We would look at, we want to fix this, or we want to address this, and they're like, but that doesn't work for this, and then you had you started looking at all of the problems, and finally we had to realize we only can address this thing. And it's in a perfect world, a grant would come and you would just make whole people.
Right.
You can't. And so you got to find one little piece of the corner and pray that another organization is going to address the other piece, and then maybe organizations working together will create a whole person.
And that's where the partnerships come into play. So
I felt guilty because I'm here representing an orchestra, and I'm going, oh my gosh, gosh, these people need money a lot more than we do.
Right, but you know, sometimes there's a lot of addressing self-worth and that kind of thing that is part of what you provide in your program that might be about music, but it's about the relationships between the staff and those kids, right? Or that having confidence that you can perform in front of people, or that you can work together as a group in an orchestra, develops a sense of self-worth. And so you build it into what you're doing, even if the topic is not we're eliminating poverty, which is, you know, pretty tall order for a mission. So I think that this group would need to maybe start with what your program is and go backwards to define what the problem is, because you've basically mapped out pretty much our agenda for social change in America, which is, or around the world even. So
You're aggressive already.
I was
Yeah.
gonna add to that,
Yeah.
one of my personal belief of the mental issue is lack of exercise. The body needs movement, no matter where you go, you do. And because of social media and even the school system doesn't have enough probably. And let's say we haven't been issues and kids at their young age, when they become adult, they haven't done no exercise, they become fat, they become whatever, they lack of whatever. And adults that lay down too much probably because many conditions or whatever. I believe exercise will help moderate our mind and have more like focus on many things, because exercise.
So you should connect with the recreation folks who could build that into, you know, strong bodies, strong minds, or, you know, something like that to, you know, enhance, you know, we're not just out here. I mean, actually, I would love to write a grant just about play, you know, the role of play, you know, again, to get away from the screens and all that kind of thing. But yeah, there is, you know, a long-term health investment, mental health as well as physical health. So yeah, so you can connect those things. All right, so what is this group here?
We're a lot less esoteric. I'm kind of more nuts and bolts
Okay.
because I came in at thinking about how to write for grants. It's not as personal for me, so I kind of bring more of a project management. And then the other people on the team, can you please say what your position is? I'm sorry.
I'm the public works director.
So we tackled a problem that Andrew said that fits into this, which is, you know, in order to have the jobs, you have to have the demand. And so there's a demand in what he does for skilled labor, and then also craftsmen that make a career out of fulfilling those positions, and that there's a lack of that. So
There's a lack of people who can provide these,
well,
who can do this work.
there is, yeah. I
Okay.
mean, plumbers, electricians, carpenters, tradespeople. There's a big gap because Andrew was saying that people in, you know, his average age of worker is 48.
Okay, so there's
you know,
that
they're
retirement.
looking at
Yeah.
retirement 10 years, 15 years out, and there's nobody replacing that. And with automation replacing so many things, skilled labor really is in high demand everywhere. So I think that's one issue, and then Gary was saying that the steel industry left this area, and that really created a gap. So I think from project management kind of standpoint, I was thinking that you've got this problem, and so you need to figure out how you replace an income of good money. Steel workers made decent money, so you need to be looking at jobs in 50,000-60,000 range for median income, maybe like after 10 years in whatever in the position. So the need here for the skilled worker also meets this demand of people looking for that. But how do we connect the resources? So that is where you know, we look to grants maybe for displaced workers, older workers. There's a big recovery community here that are maybe 3 to 5 years out and have really rebuilt their lives after the opioid crisis. So there's people that we can find through Unemployment Bucks Opportunity Council programs there, and maybe more of a communication campaign to go with that incorporates the services of Bucks County Opportunity Council, maybe the college, the community college, unemployment offices, townships, high school recruitment, working hand in hand with vocational training centers.
So what is your organization? Are you going to be the connector to bring the partnerships together? Or are you going to?
I don't think we got to that point. I think we were just defining
Defining and how to solve the problem.
Okay.
what is the issue, how do we solve this, and can we kill two birds with one stone, like aside from just the living wage and the self-sufficiency that helps the community to thrive. You know, when you've got good solid incomes, people are able to retain their homes just because they lost a steel mill job doesn't mean they can't make their mortgage. So you don't want a community to fall apart. So we were trying to think of how all that comes into play. I'm not sure.
So where would you do your research to find out all of the, how would you justify, or not justify, but flesh out these issues? What would you point
Well, we
to?
have to have a mission statement and initiative, which I think they did so well, and then we kind of did more of like, how do we fix the problem? So I'm not sure.
Oh, I was just referring to the second place of what kind of data assessment would you use to establish your case?
Well then, that would be looking at figure the numbers, displaced workers, how many older workers are out. You can, there are so many resources out there with the community, with the state as well. I'm sure Pennsylvania has records of each township, each county, where they have these displaced workers. You can look at numbers from unemployment.
You can probably,
Median incomes,
well,
right?
you could also look at, a lot of the jobs, and again, we were focusing on also this area, a lot of the jobs would have been defined just in the union information.
Mm.
Go to the union halls and trying to help, realizing that, thousands of people were laid off, and even if everything came back, you're not gonna hire nearly as many as was there, but they can tell you how many people lost their jobs, what their age, what their educational background, because that's all part of their data and stuff. And it's basically a retraining concept of educating folks. You got to be retrained. You may not like it, but if you want to go, you're gonna have to be retrained to do something. Take the skills that you learn and apply them to a different area.
We've got the census going on as well too. I just worked on phase one, and so there's going to be a lot of data coming out of that. But I think
So your view of this was similar to the group that was talking about the closing of Hahnemann. So it's like an event-driven kind of response. And so what kind of funding would you imagine, would it be government? Would it be private foundations? Who would kind of come to?
all of it. Why limit?
Why limit? Okay. All funders.
I mean, there's a federal initiative to rebuild our country coming soon because there needs to be. Our infrastructure is falling apart. And that plays hand in hand with this other need for more skilled, physically labored workers and artisans to do that. Like this is the next career path. This is what computers were to my generation, like either hop on board and fly with it or be left in the dust. So I think you can make the argument federally, you could make that argument with the state, you could make it on a community level, you could involve,
That's where I think the foundation director online would come in handy to look at even the private corporations that are looking towards
Corporate grants, great.
training. There's a lot of foundations out there that understand that this problem is there, that people, education, training, a piece of this is psychological, emotional support for the people going through this. If somebody's been, say they're in their mid to late 40s, but for the past 25 years, they started right out of high school and they're now highly skilled, highly paid in a particular plant or mill, and boom, that's gone, it's left town. Well, the emotional impact of that is enormous. So you need to have something that's going to bridge that, and that's going to, I don't want to say cushion it, but help deal with that, but at the same time say it's okay to become take the skills you have with the training in the steel or whatever industry that was in support of the steel industry. And again, we're focusing on that because that's so dominant in this area. And then say, well, you know, there's gonna be some openings over the next several years in the public works areas of water, sewer, management plants and stuff like that, that's highly skilled stuff. You gotta have all sorts of technical certifications and you just don't walk, you know, it's but there are also jobs that have security. They're never gonna be farmed out overseas. And they come with a fairly reasonable pay and they come with with pretty good benefits. I mean, and these are people, they're the silent people we don't see, but we use them every time we flush. And every time we turn on the water spigot, every time you know, I mean, and the same thing with, you know, in that kind of, that was just focusing on the one thing that Andrew's talking about. He has this problem where he sees on the horizon the potential of not being able to hire people to do something like this. And over here, you got a lot of people that are really qualified, maybe not specifically qualified for this, but they're capable of being qualified to meet that need in very good jobs.
So I'm going to put in a shameless plug, contact the community college.
Shameless plug, the Bristol Borough on March 26th is having a career fair. And if you have a business that wants to be a vendor for that, you are looking for people to hire. Or you are trying to get kids to know about these potential jobs for the future, please come and see me and I will get you on our spreadsheet.
Where is that?
What's the date of that?
That is March 26th, and it'll be at Snyder Girardi Elementary here in town. And we still do have space for vendors, or different career possibilities. We're trying to get the kids involved, but we're also like very open for people with resumes coming for hiring.
So this is a really important point, which is that there are a lot of efforts going on that people might not know about, and libraries. I mean, Grundy is you know, the heart of the community down here, but there are a lot of things going on and partnerships that can be made, and you know, getting on board with what's already happening. It's just a matter of knowing and getting clued in. So that's part of, you know, being in the grant world, is knowing what are those social service agencies serving in Bucks County, what are those initiatives going on at the state level. Yep.
The career fair is being marketed throughout the school, but it's not being marketed to adults. It's being marketed to juniors and seniors. So you may want to put that out there if you're looking for adults that are looking for jobs and have resumes, that it's open to them as well. Because everything that I've seen, every flyer that I've seen is geared towards the kids.
Yeah, I do have community on there, but it doesn't say adults in really big letters.
That's a problem that could be solved. There's a communication gap in this area. Like, all these great resources are here. I lost a job a year ago and I had to go out and find them. And believe me, they're here. Like, this community will help you get yourself back on your feet, or you know, figure out what the next step is. But it's just so hard finding the information. And I think if you're gonna rebuild an area, you need that kind of campaign where kids are talking about it at school, where churches are talking about it, you know, at service on Sunday, where you know, it needs to kind of be like the whole community coming together. And I think that's part of maybe what you look at. Maybe there are some grants out there for that PR media blitz to get like an initiative. When you look at programs, like I saw something on Shark Tank where one of the guys was talking about, they went in and took a town that just said, we're not gonna die. Like, steel mills dried up or whatever the industry was, and they rebuilt the town, but there's a campaign there to like get the information out. There's so many resources here.
Yeah.
Well, that's the one problem that comes with this is, what are people actually looking at, and for what age ranges? Because there are so many media and other platforms. What is there one common element? Newspapers aren't necessarily that anymore.
I think it's the buzz, right? It's the current. And when you get like the funding like they got for Mill Street, like people are talking about that. We got grants here in this town, and it's making things happen, and so you create that.
And,
And
you
then
know,
other grants want to be part of it, I would think. They
right.
want
There
to-
is a sort of a effect that, you know, grant money begets money when you can say we've been invested in.
Right.
Join
Where
us,
we're
yeah.
going, and then
Yeah.
you're all part of that.
It just occurred, I would have never connected these two. It just happens I've been to two great seminars, this one and one previous. And I would have never thought there was a connection between the two until what you just brought up was about connecting resources. The Visit Bucks just gave a seminar up at Washington Crossing on designing your social media footprint.
Mhm.
Your presence in Twitter, your presence in
Mhm.
Facebook, your presence in Snapchat's hardly used anymore, but Instagram, some others. And if when you're applying for, I know that we at NCO, Newtown Chamber Orchestra, we've used excerpts from our website as backup material to our grants
Mhm.
to show that we have a community presence,
Yep.
that we have had
Yep.
successes in the past in raising money and in benefiting the community. So, and there might be grants, you would know this perhaps, I have no idea, I don't know if there's grants out there for people to help with the cost of website design and construction, there might be.
The
Yeah.
library will do that for you. If you go to your library, there are plenty of college students who donate their time.
I was going to say, you
Get
know,
your computer with
there are
you.
creative ways to do that. I think sometimes you can build into your grant that you're going to have that staff person spending the time doing it,
Okay.
or that you're going to purchase a platform, or you know you're going to do something. But
But I would have never connected
Yeah.
these two until today.
Yeah.
I'm going,
Yeah.
you know, there is
Yeah.
a symbiosis between them.
and funders want to fund organizations that can show that they've done the work and they can do the work. They need to have confidence in you as an organization, and that you've been effective previously. It's hard to get started. Then there's some grants that are purely for startups, you know. So you just have to find the right place and the right time. Yeah.
That's what I was gonna ask you. Is there a, when you think of categories of grants, my assumption was that once you've been granted money once by any organization, you kind of put yourself in a position to be hopefully granted again.
Mhm.
But are there grants that, for people who have never gotten a grant, and how do you, like, you know, this process is showing us how to make yourself a grantee, but are there grants specifically for people who this is their first time, they've never done this before, but they know they have a good idea and a good product or service that's going to be effective?
There are grants for startups or seed organizations, and this is something that I won't go into a lot, or maybe at all today, but there are certain thresholds that you need to meet. For example, if you're going to apply to a foundation grant, you have to be a a 501c3 organization or some other designation that shows that you're not you're a nonprofit. That's not the same thing as a not-for-profit. You need to have a board of directors. You need to, have audits. You need to have, you need to show that you have an infrastructure so that you can even just fill out the application. Because a lot of times they'll say, give us your list of board of directors, give us your operational budget from last year, give us. So you need to, sometimes startup groups have to find other ways to start up, whether they're within another organization and they break out, or whether you've gotten external donations from a major giver, or you've gotten a small grant from a bank or something like that. But you have to have the structure as an organization to actually even qualify to apply. So I'm not going to talk today about how do you do that, but that's a really good point to bring up, which is that as an individual, if you read a lot of the grant requests, the RFPs, whatever you're going to call them, they say we do not fund individuals, we do not fund, X, Y, and Z. So you have to have your organization structure in order to even play in this sandbox. So that's an important, really, really important point. Thanks for bringing that up. All right, we could talk about, this is great. I'm so glad the conversation was generated. Yeah.
Can I just ask a real basic question,
Yep.
and that is, what's the definition for a living wage job?
I think that depends in whatever region you live in, and I can't put a number on it, but I think it goes beyond the poverty line measure, which really has to do with meals for a family of 4, which doesn't account for healthcare costs and paying your taxes and childcare and the other expenses that we know that we have. I think a living wage would cover the broader definition of not being in poverty. It's being there's something called the self-sufficiency standard in PA, which encompasses those different areas of family costs that can define if you can have a wage that covers all these different things, then you can be self-sufficient. I guess we can also think about, are there benefits that are extended? And that's, we usually think about healthcare, but there's also paying into Social Security. There's also workman's compensation. There's, all those other things, long-term, or life insurance, whatever it might be. Those kinds of jobs are living wage jobs that have all those elements. And those are, every organization, major organization, my organization, it's hiring more and more part-time people. It's very expensive to pay for a full-time employee. And that's a problem. If nobody in your family, if you're working 2 different jobs, but you don't get those benefits from anywhere and nobody else in your family can provide them, then you're paying for healthcare out of pocket, or, so.
Ridiculous, the prices.
Yeah. So then we're going to get into like we can talk about the political field right now. So we got to limit our scope here. One last comment. Yeah. I'm sorry?
And when talking about, make sure your kids go into, the sciences and become computer programmers, because we'll always have computer programming. That's the wrong mindset, because I used to work for Tyson Foods, and Tyson Foods is laying off 300 internal IT people because they're going to outsource it. You have these outsourced IT back office type things that are consolidating the IT resource needs for many companies in one location.
Goes on the cloud,
and
right?
People that I worked with and had very expensive mortgages and had their kids in nice schools are now out of a job in Northwest Arkansas. It's like, gee, who saw this coming?
It's a changing economy.
Let's all be coders and computer programmers and stuff like that. I'm sorry. Back in the 70s, when I was getting in college and getting ready to go to school to become a scientist, they shut down the space program, and all these PhDs in the natural sciences were out of work.
Mm-hmm.
So it's impossible to try and look at a crystal ball. You just need to make sure that educational opportunities are available for people to follow their bliss and get trained in jobs that they.
And, we know that workforces that, it's no longer the case that you work for the same company for 30 years. If you look at the employment patterns of, the younger generations, people stay in jobs for 3 years, 2 years, move on, that kind of thing. But, all right, so really interesting conversation, gives us motivation to do the work that we're doing and try to find resources for it. So I'm going to have to do a speed section here, go through it in a speedy way so that we can get to lunch at 12:30, because people need to get out and get their lunch and come back. But, the conversation's really important, and I really appreciate that everybody's thinking so hard. So you've made your case, you've defined your problem, you've done some research, you've put the program, the solution that you're applying to, to get funded forward in that context. Then you have to get to sort of the nuts and bolts about how you're going to show that this program is effective, right? You have to have goals and objectives so that the funder can see that you have focused in on a particular vision of how you're going to promote change and you're going to benefit the community, individuals, groups. A conceptual framework we'll talk a little bit about. What are your outcomes going to be? What's the impact of your work? How do you know you're going to be successful? What does success look like? and how are you going to measure it, right? And so to look at that, we're going to look at some logic models. Has anyone ever heard of a logic model or used it for your own work? Yeah. Just a way to organize the flow of how you're going to communicate all these important things about how your program is really the best answer to this problem. I have all kinds of little pictures of roadmaps and so on that you can look at later. Difference between goals and objectives. Goals are really broader statements about what you're trying to accomplish, both through your program and tying back to the mission of your organization. Objectives are specific actions that you can measure, that have time frames, that support the completion of the goal. Okay, so objectives are more, what are you going to do? And the goals are, based on this problem, based on the mission of our organization, this is what we want to see happen, or this is what we're going to make happen. Put it in a much more active voice. As grant writers, you have to be very active. You can't talk in the passive voice and make those funders believe that you're the ones who are going to make this change happen, right? So this is the term SMART, or the acronym SMART is used. Sometimes there's a different A for, in SMART, achievable, actionable. But basically, you really need to think about your objectives in this way. If you're going to encourage self-confidence, you've got to break that down into some actual changes that you can document, whether it's skills or attitudes or some kind of behavior that you're going to change. So those objectives have to have all these things: be time-bound, achievable, specific, measurable, realistic. You got to get down to the nuts and bolts in your grant presentation. I could talk all day about outcomes. That was my job at United Way for a number of years, helping agencies define their program outcomes. What are we going to see at the end of this program? What kinds of changes are we going to see in skills, in attitudes, in knowledge, what we actually know about raising a child, or about being fiscally sound, financial literacy. What kinds of behaviors in the interim are you trying to change? Are you working with a client that has never had a savings account before? And a change in behavior would be somebody who sets up a bank account and a savings account and starts to put money into it. And then what are the longer term, this is the trickiest one, outcome that you can really honestly say can be shown in the course of time that you're running this program. So what I mean by this is, in that example of someone who's doing some financial literacy work, we can see that they learn about how to manage a budget and how to make a budget. We can see that they've started a savings account and started to put money in regularly. That's a change of behavior. But the long-term kind of condition or status that we want to get to is that they're financially sound, that they're living within their budget, that they are repairing their credit, that they are able to save some money. What we're not going to say is a long-term outcome for that person is that they're going to become a millionaire. We don't know that. It's too long from now to tell. We hope for the best for them, but that's not within the scope of our program, right? So usually that's an issue when we talk about changes, programs, after-school programs for kids. We can talk about moving through grades as a longer-term outcome, that these children, because of this after-school program, are learning new homework skills. They are completing their work and participating in class more. And by the end, we see that they've completed their grade and moved to the next one. What we can't say is that those kids are going to graduate from high school. It's too long of a horizon. We're not going to be with those kids at that point. I mean, maybe if you're a big brother or big sister, you might be, and that's really a beautiful thing in that program, which is that, that relationship and that work extends over time. But usually we have those students for a school year or, a number of sessions or something like that. So long-term outcomes are a little bit harder to show, but we need to think about how are we going to show the funder, and not really just how are we going to show the funder, but how are we going to show as a organization that's effective that we have produced change in individuals and in groups, that we've strengthened the community, that we have, helped individuals reskill. We need to be able to measure that. So this is an example of a logic model. I use the United Way logic models a lot. You can actually Google United Way logic models and get lots of examples. I use these because this is where I lived and breathed for a long time, and I think that they're useful. The logic model is a way for you to organize these different parts of your program and how you're going to communicate that to a funder. It's almost like a flow chart, right? Inputs are, what do we need to invest in this program? So what do you think you would need to invest in a program that you want to run? What resources do you need? People, money, a place, stuff, time. So those are your inputs. Then you think about your outputs. What activities do? We run classes, we do field trips, we do training, we do internships, we do any number of activities, right? So what do we actually do in the program? And who are our participants? Who are we trying to reach? Okay, you have to have a specific audience, and you have to recruit that audience. You have to recruit those people to come to your program. That is a huge task in itself. Sometimes that's even considered an initial outcome, is we actually recruited 30 people to come to this session today. That shows a bunch of activity of outreach that is part of the program overall, because if you don't have anyone who comes, then you don't have a program, right? And then you think about your different outcomes in the short, medium, and long term, which we just talked about: changes in skills and knowledge, attitudes, behaviors, long-term condition or status. How are you going to measure those outcomes? What do you think? What would you use to measure a change in skill or a change in knowledge? Yeah.
Maybe they would have to demonstrate that they completed a course of training and they got the certificate, or if it was a test-based certificate, they have to show that they passed the exam. Like, we do a training for pharmacy tech, and there is an actual pharmacy tech exam that makes you certified, so then maybe they would have to take that exam and get a pass.
That's great. That's a great example. So did you do this with CVS?
They were one of
yeah. So with outcomes measures, you have the method that you're going to use to collect the data. Is it a survey? Is it a completion of a test? Is it an interview? And then the data source is the certificate itself, right? There's a certificate or there's not a certificate. So you have to think about, when you're measuring outcomes, how are you going to do that, with what kind of tool, and what is your source of data? Are they records that you're going to look at, graduation records? Are they, going to be a survey that the participant takes themselves, where they're self-reporting? Is it going to be observations of the staff, where you use an observation tool that says student did this, student did that, student did that? And those are all criteria that show a successful outcome in whatever that program is. So you have to think about how are you going to measure, what kind of tool are you going to use, and what's your data source? Yeah.
Does the outcome measure also have to relate back to the initial problem statement? In other words, if you're saying people need to find a living wage to be self-sufficient, would that be also one of the outcome measures? Or how many people did find? Did you help find jobs for to be self-sufficient?
That's a perfect question, because those outcomes measures need to be indicators of that goal, right? That goal has been met. And, what percentage of your participants actually got there. Might not be 100%, but, you have to look at what the sort of industry averages of how many people usually do succeed in that kind of training or whatever it might be. And another aspect of grant writing art is to come up with these outcomes and these indicators and measures and so on that really relate to what you say you're going to do and what you say the problem is. It all has to tie together, which is the exercise we're going to do this afternoon. So you've really set us up nicely for that. So you have to be able to do a lot of different things to put a grant proposal together. You have to think like an accountant when you put together your budget, which we'll go over after lunch. You have to think about how you're going to analyze your data and what actually happened, how you're going to define what success looks like. These have to be very specific, and they have to relate to the bigger picture that you have drawn. So I'm giving you kind of what you need to do. I could do seminars all day on each of them, but I'm just trying to give you an overview of really what the pieces are of grant writing that need to be there. This is another sample logic model that fills out what is under these different headings. What do we invest? What do we do? Who do we reach? Short-term, intermediate, long-term outcomes. This is a kind of a nice piece because it talks about assumptions and external factors, which is sort of what we did this morning, which is, what are we assuming about the problem? How are we defining that problem? And what are some of the things that are outside of our program that we can't control? We can't change those people who I was talking to a group about soft skills, and was that with this group, and someone said, what if somebody just can't, or this was this group, what if somebody just can't do those things? Sometimes there are external factors for that, and sometimes it's an internal factor. But these are all things to consider when you're mapping out your program. And the beauty of the logic model is once you've mapped it out like this, you can answer every question on a grant application or in putting together a proposal.
Is that somewhere? Is that on the website?
I
know it's in the handout here, but it's kind of hard to see.
Yeah, we're going to be sending out the actual slides, right?
Thank you.
To everybody who came today, and also you can look up on a search engine United Way logic models, and it'll give you ones from all over the country and at every level of specification. There are other logic models. I don't mean to promote United Way in any way. It's just that this is what I know. But there are different types. You can even just look up logic models and see different types that might suit your thought flow better. But I think these are pretty good in terms of how they translate into writing a grant, right? They give you all the pieces that you need. So I think we did it. I think this is what I wanted to cover. Let me see on our agenda. We have a few minutes for questions. Does anyone want to? I just kind of sped through this, but logic models might seem a little painful to do at first, but it's actually, if you sat down and did this for an hour, you would put yourself way ahead on your grant writing project because you would know exactly what you want to do and how it ties together. So any questions about the roadmap concept, the outcomes, the logic models? And how many people have had experience actually coming up with outcomes for a program? Yeah. So it's important to think about indicators. How do we know, what do we measure? How do we know that that outcome has happened? So let's do a thought example. So our outcome is that elementary school kids are more confident about themselves. We'll use the confidence. What would be an outcome? What would be an indicator of that? How would we show confidence?
Better grades, they're getting better grades.
Okay, so we could look at their grades.
Their grades.
Yep.
Classroom participation and stuff. If they're not confident in themselves, they're going to be not lax, but they're going to be hesitant in doing it, I think.
Okay.
But if they're going to be, if they've increased their confidence, they're willing to get involved, be part of the group, maybe take on a challenge or lead or something.
Right. So you could even do that within the context of your program is how do they participate in the program as opposed to when they started and when they finished. And maybe a measurement tool could be caseworkers' notes. I mean, that's valid, right? That they're taking notes or it's some kind of checklist about what the student could do coming in and what they didn't, what they do at the end, how much they completed a project, they participated with a group, whatever. You can assess those things with tools, right? You can always do a self-reporting survey. with questions that are tested. Like Big Brothers Big Sisters has a national survey that they give to their littles, the students, the children who are partnered, and those questions have been tested and vetted and so on that show levels of confidence. So we can't really always rely on just making up our own questions, but there's a lot of information out there, especially you can just look things up and survey on self-confidence, and you'd probably find some tool out there that somebody published. So those are indicators that the outcome has happened. Number and percent of students who reported that they felt more comfortable participating in a group. And the question on the survey might have been, I don't know what the question would be, but it measures that level of confidence, right? Like more of a social psychological survey.
Big Sisters, Big Brothers has that. That's what how they use it.
Yeah, they do. It's they have people who design these surveys and they use them with their littles, and you have to believe that they use this on their grant applications. This percentage of our children reported a change in these skills or attitude or self-confidence, whatever it is, based on their relationship in a mentoring pair, something like that, right? So you use your stats to try to get more resources, as well as to find out whether you're being effective. Okay?
And you go to others to get stats also.
Yeah.
You call Big Brothers Big Sisters and talk about partnering or information sharing.
Absolutely. Or, you offer the mentoring match relationship. We want to bring in this other aspect. Can we partner with your organization? So, for example, I'm actually working with Big Brothers Big Sisters now with my foundation's community partnership hat on to connect college students at the community college as bigs or as interns in the organization, or, because it could be a great fit for a college student to be participating in the organization. So partnerships we'll talk a little bit about later, but they're very important. You don't always have to do it on your own. So any other questions? All right, I think it's lunchtime. Thanks, everybody.